Hello, sweet Doc Martin friends, and welcome back to today's video. We are going to be doing a reaction video. I don't know why this thought came over me, but I thought it would react to Rose Anville's video. I'll link his channel down below for you guys. So he does really intricate breakdowns of different shoes and their actual functionality. And I thought that was a really cool idea, but I also wanted to react, being an avid Doc Martin buyer slash wearer, to his video where he exposes Doc Martens. And I think he's done more than one of these, but I'm gonna do the more recent one. I'll link his channel and the video down below for you. I'm not gonna be mean or anything like that, guys. So if you're here for drama or whatever, please, that's not what this is about. I'm just reacting from the perspective of somebody who literally loves what Doc Martens stand for and loves Doc Martens as a whole and spends a lot of her income on them. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the reaction.
Martin boots are pretty easily in the top 10 most popular boots of all time. I think there's a safe argument to be made there. And they were the very first boots that I ever cut apart 3 years ago, 300 pairs of boots later, and over $60,000 worth of footwear cut in half, trying to show you guys what you're spending your hard-earned money on.
This guy obviously appears to know what he's talking about. Like he mentions in the video, 3 years ago, he already tore apart these boots, and he really digs into the soles and the dynamics. I didn't do any research of my own, guys, so I don't know if that will make this a less reactive video or not, but I'm kind of just going based off of my own opinion. And he's also only doing one style of Docs, and who knows if all the other styles are the same, if there's consistencies or inconsistencies. So those are just things to take into account as I continue on this reaction.
Former German soldier was recovering from a broken bone post-war in Munich, and he started prototyping a boot with a cushioned sole that had air cushioning. And he showed this prototype to his mechanical engineer friend, Dr. Herbert Funk, sick last name, and they started making shoes from unused military supplies. And then in 1947, they started actual formal production on the shoes, and they developed a large market by selling mostly to older women because old ladies' feet hurt, they're crammed in their little teen. Have you ever seen old school shoes? Those poor old ladies, their toes are always crammed. And then in 1959, the business was doing so well, they started looking at overseas businesses and expanding the new Doc Martin theory of this air sole, all this stuff. And then in 1960, Bill Griggs of the Griggs family we talked about in 1901 saw an ad for the German shoes in the trade magazine, and he liked the air cushion sole idea. So he acquired a license and made several key changes that now define the Doc Martin brand, starting with changing the name from Dr. Martin, spelled this way, to Dr. Martin, spelled this way. They altered the heel, they simplified the bulbous upper, the two-tone sole edge, and the distinct sole pattern, and most importantly, the black and white heel loop and yellow stitching, which is really the defining feature to me for Doc Martin. And then on April 1st, 1960, the Dr. Martin 1460 was born. Started as a work boot, so it pivoted from these old ladies with sore feet to these men who needed a nice, comfortable boot for work. And then shortly after, it was picked up by the ska-loving skinheads and Pete Townsend of The Who. So it slowly became a symbol of working class pride and rebellious attitude.
I love that he introduces the history of Doc Martens. I'm a little perturbed by the fact that he said that he dislikes them very much, and it definitely made me feel some type of way, like they're that bad. Being someone who wears them on her feet a lot at work for hours and hours straight, I will say some of the styles do cause my feet some pain, but for the most part, especially their 1460 styles, I find them to be extremely comfortable for workwear. So I don't know, I'm just wondering if he's ever actually worn a pair. I mean, who knows? I don't know the guy, but has he ever actually worn a pair or worn different pairs of them? I completely understand he's coming from a scientific perspective, and I 150% respect that. Has he ever actually worn a pair? Anyway, he's getting into the history, so this is getting good. Let's get back to it.
And early goth subcultures, also in the 1980s by anti-government riots, social resentment, especially in Britain, which once again, the Doc Martens became a symbol of those groups, especially with the musical groups of that time. And then in 1990, same thing again, grunge, Britpop, nu metal bands all championed this shoe, making the 1460 the boot that represented the grunge movement and this anti-establishment, kind of this counterculture attitude that was from the 90s all the way up to the 2000s. And then in the 2000s, as culture started to shift away from that, sales also started to drop. And that leads us to 2003, when all but one of the UK factories had to be closed to avoid bankruptcy, and then Dr. Martin cut over 1,000 jobs and moved a lot of its production overseas to China and Thailand, which led to the inevitable opinion of Doc Martin lovers that the quality had dropped, that they had sold out.
Love that Pete Townsend started it and technically started it, but this is why Doc Martens has the rep it does, and love that he went to the background and the actual history. It shows respect for the brand.
Cheaper than they used to be because they moved the production overseas. And then in 2007, the original factory started making handmade Dr. Martin boots, which helped revitalize the value of the brand, even though only 1% of all the Doc Martin boots that were made in England, while the remaining 99% were made overseas.
Even when I was diving into Doc Martin history, I actually did a video on that too, which I'll link that video down below for you. It is interesting that they did move everything overseas, and generally, you know, a lot of those factories are producing our fast fashion clothing now. So it did perturb me to think about that a little bit more deeply, and that the brand is more so of a sellout brand now. And I'm not gonna lie, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable knowing that I've put so much of my hard-earned cash into them. And it honestly makes me feel like going forward, I should probably be thrifting the Doc Martens I want and not buying them new. Be a goal of mine going forward. And, you know, as much as we know as Americans about overseas production and, you know, how those workers get treated, we tend to turn our heads the other way. And even myself, for years and years, unfortunately, I was so selfish, I never even thought twice about it. And as I started to find out more and get more into the thrifting community, I started to really put it into perspective. And even knowing it all, it's still so hard, as privileged as we are, hello, privileged United States, you know, to stop buying these things. I made it a goal of mine since I started this channel, especially, to really hone in on focusing my attention onto being more sustainable. And I know that's a cliche, but if I could thrift everything in my wardrobe, or at least almost thrift everything, there are certain things, you know, that need to be bought new, then that would make me so happy. And I'm really close, guys. I'm really close. And this video is, again, shifting my perspective further into the direction of only thrifting my Docs.
For today, and Doc Martin's popularity has soared once again to meet the cyclical pattern that the rebellious subcultures adopting the Docs based off the previous generation and what they saw, and not copying, but emulating the counterculture of the previous generations. And so you can see why people would be upset by the counterculture boot selling out and moving production overseas, seeing the drop in quality, and still pretending to be the counterculture boot. So has Doc Martin shifted back to their roots, or have they just continued on this path of monetizing rebellious subcultures by selling them the exact thing most of these generations of rebellious Doc wearing people were raging against? Well, let's find out by looking at the leather first, because that's my expertise as a professional leather worker, and I have talked a whole lot of crap about Doc Martin's leather, and especially this leather, which is Dr. Martin's most popular leather, the smooth leather, which gives Docs their recognizable shine, but also its recognizable splitting and cracking. So why is that?
I do want to make a comment on the splitting and cracking that he mentioned. This is not something I tend to notice with Docs at all. The leather really does hold up well, so I don't know if this is something maybe that happened to him in the past. Obviously, individuals who have older Doc Martens, like vintage Docs from like the 90s, you know, those may get to a point where the leather starts to crack, maybe. Hard on the maybe, but even the pair that I have had for 6 years now, they're my most worn pair, the Jaden boot, the leather is still so pristine on them. And granted, I haven't had a pair of 1460 smooth leather Docs that I have worn for a long period of time yet. So again, I'm not sure where he's getting that information from, but I have to test it out myself to know the truth.
technically a patent leather. And patent leather is a leather that has a thick synthetic coat on top that makes it a really even finish and a really polished look artificially. And for more information on patent leather, go check out the Jordan 11 video, because that video is what changed my mind about patent leather. So that's what we're gonna be comparing it to judge the quality of it, because as you're probably well aware from watching this channel, Nike is the pinnacle of leather quality, which that is a joke. They're the worst leather quality. So it's gonna be a great comparison, because if this leather is worse than Nike, not great. So if we look at the cross section, it's actually pretty surprising, because this leather has a lot of the grain in it. And it might be just this color, but it's a pretty solid cross section. And generally, the lower in the cross section, the weaker and cheaper the leather is, like suede. The higher in the cross section, the stronger and more expensive, like a full grain leather. And the wild thing is, this leather is actually cut from a higher portion of the cross section. So good job, Doc Martens. And speaking of that top coat of the patent leather, how thick is it compared to the Nike patent leather? Well, if you look at the Nike patent leather, the total thickness of the leather is about 2 millimeters thick, and the patent part is probably like half a millimeter to maybe 0.3 millimeter, which is why that really heavy layer on top of the Jordans was used to give it extra strength and performance, because it's essentially adding another grain layer on top, another structural piece to hold all those loose fibers together. Compare that to the Dr. Martens, and the total thickness is still 2 millimeter, but the patent aspect of it only makes up probably 0.1 millimeter of total thickness. So that's probably why Doc splits so easily, and why you don't get any additional durability or strength from this type of leather, because it's just a tiny, tiny layer. So it's not even patent leather per se, it's more just a cheap plastic coating on top that is similar to patent leather, but doesn't have any of the attributes of patent leather. And even under flame, they acted really different with the expected results. But it does have the grain, so that can't be ignored. At least it's a decent leather underneath of the cheap patent layer on top. I mean, it's more durable, especially to snake bites. Not the kind on goth girls, not these snake bites, but real snake bites, the puncture test, but also goth girl snake bites. It might be a relevant test. So we put it in the test, and it only took 53 pounds to puncture through, which is in the bottom 10 of all the uppers that we've punctured. Ultimately, it is still pretty cheap leather, but it's only cheap if you compare it to other boots. If you start comparing it to sneaker leather, it's actually a pretty decent leather. Don't love that thin top coat, because that's what...
Okay, I will say I have to agree that Doc Martens probably isn't the most top tier leather. The price point of the boot, considering, I think is fair. They are still made with real leather, and they are still a really durable boot that will last you years and years and years. So I do like the fact that he pointed out that it was made pretty well in that aspect. And I don't necessarily mind that he called out the quality of the leather, because let's be honest, they're not like $600 boots. They're not even $300 boots. They're $200 boots. So, you know, we're going to say that he's being fair there on calling out the quality of the leather.
About Nikes, but at least it's not just like a cheap suede coated with leather. And there are some other components on the inside that are leather, like the internal counter cover. Not many boots, especially in this price range, have a dedicated counter cover, which is really nice for Docs, because that internal patch right there helps prevent the wearing out of that area, which in Docs is vital, especially for a dainty little ankled boy like me, where I can't even tie him tight, so my foot's slipping around all over the place. The only problem is it's not leather, it's fake leather, and it's just not gonna last as long as leather. And so a lot of these things have the look of quality with none of the substance, including one of the more heinous offenders or biggest crimes of Doc Marten, which is the bouncing airwear sole. Because you'd be surprised at how many people think, because of the branding, the way that Doc Martens positions things, that they're actual air pockets that bounce you forward and give you rebound in every step. But that's not really the case, because we've cut apart plenty of Docs to know there's no capsules, there's no sealing going on in here. It's just open cells.
I will say the bouncing airwear soles, I never really put that much thought into. He does mention in the video that a lot of people think they're like pocketed soles, and no, I never really looked at it like that. I kind of thought like the sole itself was just made like it was a rubber sole, like it was bouncy, like pep in your step kind of thing. No pocketed soles. So again, correct me if I sound uneducated, but I just kind of took it at face value. I didn't really read into that so much. So I don't know if other people have, but obviously they're made with a rubber sole, so rubber can potentially bounce.
Rip this apart. Yup. Surprise, surprise. So that toe went pretty easily. The rest of this is just gonna come off like See, that's the problem. You just can't trust the boot that does that. Like that came apart so easily. So has Dr. Martin boots gotten better or have they gotten worse? Honestly, they're about the same. And that seems to be a trend for Doc Martin. They found something that worked 80 years ago and they've just been pumping it out. They found their audience and they've been pumping out the marketing to them. They've been trying to get the countercultures and these subcultures of rebellious teenagers to adopt this boot, all while they're supporting this giant corporate conglomerate, while selling the appearance of the boot with none of the substance of a boot. So do I still hate Docs? I still kind of do, but for different reasons this time, because for 170 bucks, they're a lot of money for what you get, but the leather is slightly better, at least for this color. Maybe it's just this color. And I've slightly changed my idea of what this boot actually is, because they're not boots. They're just not. They're more just sneakers that look like boots. And if you look at them that way, and expect them to perform in that way like a cheaper sneaker, and you'll probably be happy. But the thing that bothers me the most about Docs is that whole history thing. They have this really cool innovation and they have this cool story of all these countercultures supporting them. And then in 2003, they really did just kind of sell out because we've seen the quality drop. We've seen them trying to market to these countercultures. And more importantly, we've seen the lack of innovation. Dr. Martin boots could have continued to make some of the best boots in the world, some of the cushiest, comfiest boots in the world, but instead, they just made the same thing over and over and over. And it's really not Doc Martin's fault that each generation of rebellion adopts them as their shoe. But what annoys me is Doc Martin leans so strongly into that, and they use these marketing and these campaigns and this verbiage to try to sell the least counterculture boot to the counterculture movement. And so to me, if you feel like you're punk by wearing Docs, just don't forget you're wearing a very corporate boot. But now at least you have the good, the bad, the ugly.
So confirmed, he has worn them, may not still wear them. We don't know the answer to that. But he mentions he feels these high pressure points in his heel area. Now, granted, we all know that all feet are different, and working in shoes for so long and experiencing how wide a range there are of different feet, a foot is an interesting piece of anatomy. But that aside, I only feel pressure in my pinky toe, and I've mentioned that in prior videos. I never feel any pain in my heel or even like the pad of my foot, which is very interesting that he says in his foot he feels like a splitting pain through his heel. I've never ever felt that in my Doc Martens. Even, I would say with the Jadon boot, even when I first broke them in and really broke them in, like I had blisters on my ankles, broke them in, the pain was more through my pinky toe, in my toes, and on my ankle. So I don't know, I just find that so interesting that he had so much pain in his heel, because I do not experience that at all. I never have, which is why I buy so many of them, because I wear them to work. Certain Jadon styles that I will always say, and I want him to do a Jadon boot so bad and a Jadon Max boot so bad. So Rose Anvil, if you ever see this, totally do the Jadon boot or the Jadon Max boot. Again, there may not be any discrepancies between the two, but it would just be curious to see the sole difference and the leather quality difference, if there's consistencies. Okay, but anyway, that aside, the Jadon boots are always the worst out of all the Doc Martin boots that I have ever tried on. They literally are the absolute worst to break in, and they cause my foot a lot of pain. And I will say that that is a fact of the Jadon boots. I think there's a little bit of a lack of consistency with Doc Martin, especially thinking about the fact that they have factories everywhere, and then they even make made in England styles that are way much of a higher price point but supposed to be better quality. Would love to see him review a made in England style too, if he has not, to see if there really is a difference or they're just really scamming the crap out of us. Scary to think about. But anyway, getting back to the video.
PVC that this outsole is made of is only a 50 Shore A compared to most boots we see 70 to 80 Shore A. So you would expect it to be soft, but it's just not. And that's probably also the reason why these soles wear out so fast. That and the fact that the lugs are really, really shallow, and it's PVC, and so these outsoles just don't last very long. And so we wanted to test the performance of this. We did the bar drop test on it, and it actually surprised me. It was the second worst result we've ever gotten. So from the airwear bouncing soles, not a whole lot of rebound. And I think a big part of that is because the internal guts is just a disaster. They're all just at least this version, we'll see when we get the new boot cut in half, but the version from a few years ago is just a bunch of loose, cheap foam that is not connected and not glued together in any way. And so every single step you take, these layers rub together, prematurely wearing out the foam. And this foam is so cheap that it just compresses. It doesn't have a lot of recovery in it. Like once it's fully compressed, it never comes back. And that's why only after like maybe 100 miles in these things, they lose all the comfort, that, and they don't have a shank. You know, the internal bits are a complete disaster. But these are only a $170 shoe, and if you judge this through the lens of a sneaker, you might not be as harsh. I still would go hard on the fact that these are so loose and they're just like all over the place.
I completely agree with him when he talks about the price point, and I even mentioned that earlier. $170 for a leather boot is not really bad at all. And I like that he compared it to a sneaker, because sneakers can run $200 to $220, like a really good quality sneaker. So putting that into perspective, again, I really agree with him, and I appreciate that he is very level-headed in his critique.
But the number one flaw of all Doc Marten boots that I absolutely hate about these boots is the way that these boots are constructed. Because they promote a Goodyear welt, which is one of the strongest techniques to make footwear, where the outsole is sewn to the welt, and then the welt is sewn to the upper, thus combining the upper to the outsole with two different stitches, sewing together all the most important parts of the boot with big, heavy stitching. But the problem is, this isn't really Goodyear welted, because it's only half Goodyear welted, because they have the one stitch sewing the synthetic welt to the upper of the boot, but there is no stitch that sews the welt to the outsole, combining all those pieces together, which makes a Goodyear welt, all that stuff. And that's because they heat weld the outsole to the welt itself, which sounds like it'd be really strong, but if it's too hot, it burns the PVC, causing it not to bond. If it's too cold, it doesn't heat up enough to fuse those layers together. If there's even a little unfused part, eventually that leads to a complete failure of the shoe, and it's not even heat welded across the entirety of the shoe. It's just the 1/4 inch wrapping around the entire boot. And I don't think you should expect every single pair of Doc Martens to fail in this way, but every Doc Marten lover who's owned 3 or 4 has had this happen at least once. So it is a very common flaw with these boots, but maybe they fixed it. Maybe they fixed everything on the inside and it's a much better boot. I doubt it, but let's find out. So let's cut it in half.
I'm not gonna lie, watching him cut this Doc Marten in half is really, really disturbing. I don't know. It pains me. It's like, oh, the children. He's killing the children.
Oh. All right, we got it chopped in half, and if you're not subscribed, consider just pushing that little button. It's the one way that we convince sponsors to pay for these videos, which pay for these boots, which pay for the editing power, and all the tests that we run. So if you like this video, just subscribe. It helps us out a ton. So enough begging, let's see what's inside. So is it still all just loose foam on the inside? Yes, it is. At least there is still the fiberboard, but is it still heat welded together? Yes, it is. And I've been waiting to do this. Let's see how well this is heat welded together, because I have a feeling I can probably just rip this apart. Yup, surprise, surprise. So that toe went pretty easily. The rest of this is just gonna come off like, see, that's the problem.
Okay. So that was a hard call out. That is a cheap sole. And like he said, they do pride themselves on having Goodyear welted soles. So, you know, this is really making me think twice about purchasing Doc Martens new ever again. They really hype up the Goodyear welted sole, and just hearing it and the way they market it, it sounds so high-end and so quality. And we as humans and our little brains, sorry, I don't mean to say little brains, our brains revert right to, ooh, it's Goodyear welted. We know Goodyear is a quality brand, so therefore it must be a quality sole. So yeah, it's interesting how our brains do that, including mine. I like that he's being brutally honest, but it also hurts my soul, owning about 100 pairs myself now. Sorry guys, my chickens are in the background, so if you hear them, I apologize.
Information, all the test results, all the material science you need to make an informed decision on this boot, knowing how it's going to perform. Because it's really not a boot. It's a sneaker at the end of the day that's a very expensive sneaker with just decent leather that inevitably is just gonna split on you if the sole doesn't split first. So let me know what you guys think and what other Dr. Martin content you wanna see, because I like talking about Doc Martin for whatever reason. I just hate these corporate companies who try to take advantage of the people who built their brand, who are relying on their brand. It drives me nuts. So maybe we'll do like a video of like best alternatives to Doc Martens. So if you like this video, subscribe, support it, because if it does well, that's probably what we'll do. So thank you guys. See ya.
Called out of that last part. Punk is a lifestyle. It is something you stand by. And yes, Doc Martens do help me feel more punk. I will say they do. However, he called me out by saying they're extremely corporate, and obviously they are extremely corporate. And I'm okay with thrifting them and wearing them, but I think you guys are going to find going forward that this video has definitely shifted my perspective. Never say never. I'm not going to say that I'm never going to buy a new pair of Docs again, but my goal is to really try to thrift them because I do still love them. And regardless of what they are now, where they originated from was the punk, the grunge, the rebellion-esque, and, you know, regardless of the fact that now they may be only corporate, they were rooted in rebellious punk grunge roots, and for me that's still hard to get away from. So I will not stop wearing them, I will not stop styling them, but I will definitely do my best to stop buying them new, because that way I can still love what I have and still support the ever-growing thrifting world. Like that he offered to do more Doc Martin content, shout out to him. But overall, a really well done video, really intricate but without being too intense, so I liked that. And again, I like that he educated me on the quality of the boots, and I think that is right in saying that we are being taken advantage of, the people that do see Doc Martin as a really 90s grungy punk counterculture brand. And a lot of people don't really think to look into the quality of the boot because they want to assume the best of the brand, and that's just the reality of it, so me included. But yeah, I really enjoy doing this reaction, and maybe I can find some more Doc Martin videos to do this. And I really hope that you guys enjoyed this reaction. If you want to see more, please comment down below if you like. Subscribe. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you all. Talk to you guys in the next one.